Hello and welcome to the next of our series of talks on 2 Corinthians. Today I'm looking at 2 Corinthians chapter 4. There are many things that I don't like about this current situation with COVID-19, and I'm sure I don't need to itemise them for you. You could very much make your own list. But there's perhaps one aspect of the current situation that can be a challenge to us in a really helpful way. Some people have found during this time that they have begun to discover which things are really important to them. Deprived of all our props, particularly in those early days of complete lockdown, it has helped us to ask the crucial question, what is really important to me? What really matters? Perhaps thinking about what we've particularly missed during this time will help us to answer that question. As we've heard before in this series, Paul, in the period before writing this letter, has had a really difficult time. Later on in chapter 11, he writes these words: 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger from the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. As if that were not more than enough, he's also been heavily criticised for not being impressive enough in his preaching style, and even worse, for misusing the gospel for his own ends. This really grim time has led Paul as well to ask that same question, what really matters to me? So what answer did Paul give? Quite simply this, the good news of Jesus. That is what really matters to him. He's just a messenger. It is the message that counts. I love that we all learn in really different ways. I need to read things to kind of see the words. Other people learn by hearing things, some by doing something. And the fourth group learn visually. In this passage, Paul uses 3 images to describe what he's trying to say in a letter that would have been read out in the churches. So let's look at each of them in turn. First of all, he speaks about light and darkness in verses 1 to 6. Light has been really important to Paul. On the road to Damascus, he experiences a literally blinding light, and Jesus speaks to him, and he comes to faith. Here, Paul reminds us that this is how creation began, when God spoke light into the darkness. Just as Paul says, creation began when God commanded light, so our new lives are started when God's light shines into our hearts and minds. When we really get it, we really understand who Jesus is and what he has done for us. The Message puts it like this: we saw and understood God in the face of Christ. Now, Paul is not naive. He knows that some people are not understanding the good news and not responding to it. There is a reality to the power of evil, he says, that blinds people from seeing the light. And this is a challenge to us, isn't it? If there are those we know who can't yet see the truth of the gospel, how much are we praying for them to be able to see it? So Paul would say to us, the task is really very simple. Share about Jesus and get out of the way. Don't draw attention to ourselves. Don't block the light with our own egos or our own agendas, but let it shine out in our lives. Then he has a second picture about treasure in jars of clay from verses 7 to 12. At the time of Jesus and Paul, there were no banks in which to store money or valuable items. So if you'd save some coins, you would put them in an everyday jar or pot, something that was used for all sorts of tasks. The container wasn't important. In fact, it was very fragile and easily damaged. But what was in it that was actually what counted. If the pot was beautiful, then the risk was that the pot would assume the importance and not the treasure inside. Paul is very aware that he is fragile, and he uses some very strong words to describe the difficult time that he has had. He says that he's hard pressed on every side, and it's the word that's used of when an opponent boxes somebody in so they can't move to get out. He's been confused and unsure, but God has never abandoned him. Even when he's been persecuted by people, somehow he has hung on to God. He's been hunted down like an animal, but he's never been destroyed. In other words, he has been knocked down, but never knocked out. He's been able to get up again, and so can we. It's looking back, though, that Paul can see this. In chapter 1, we can tell that at times he certainly felt as though he had been abandoned or crushed. Certainly I know that looking back in my own life, that's when I can see how God has held me. I haven't always been able to see it at the time. Sometimes in times of suffering, we need someone else to hold on to the hope for us. I wonder if that's you at the moment. If it is, don't be afraid to reach out. Or perhaps God is calling you to offer that to someone else. Why not take the initiative then to reach out to them? Paul recognises that just as the cross came before the resurrection, so in some remarkable way that we can't really quite understand, God takes our suffering and weaves it into not just the suffering, but also the resurrection of Jesus. We are fragile, but we are what someone called purposeful pots, and can be used by God for his kingdom. And then we have the third picture in verses 13 to 18, the weight of glory. Paul loves to quote the Old Testament and relies on his hearers to fill in the blanks. He starts this final section with words from Psalm 116. I believed, therefore I have spoken. Perhaps take a moment to pause this video or reading the Sunday Circular and take a moment to read that psalm. It's a remarkable psalm of thanks, where the writer has been rescued from some acute danger. Like them, Paul has known God bring him through some really difficult times where he feared for his very life, and that makes him even more determined to speak out. Paul has resolved to look beyond the present with all its challenges to what lies ahead. Yes, he would say, things may seem to be falling apart, but God is at work. And all that we experience, which can seem so endless now, from the standpoint of eternity is just a blink, a passing moment. Beyond what we can see, there is something quite extraordinary. These bodies are like a tent, and at times, if you're anything like me, that tent can feel quite ragged and torn. But there will come a time when we live in a palace. Paul has run out of words, and so the only expression he can find is the weight of glory. He's describing the indescribable. The best is yet to come, not behind us. What a wonderful promise in a time of pandemic, but actually at any time. Now, of course, it can be hard at times, can't it, to see beyond our current restrictions, whether that's COVID-19 or other health issues or family or financial pressures. Paul would encourage us, I think, with a challenge, but also with two huge truths. First of all, the challenge. What effect do the tough times that we have on us? Do we slip into bitterness and regret, which it can be so easy to do when things are so tough? Or do we ask God to use these experiences to shape us, to help us to look more like Jesus, and to help us to determine to share the good news. This is hard, and it will only become possible if we call on the help of the Holy Spirit. And now the truths. Firstly, we have an amazing message to share. We have a God who loves us, who has given everything for us, and who is always with us. So how can we both keep our eyes fixed on him and also get out of the way to enable people to see him and not us? And finally, we do have an amazing future. All through the Gospels, Jesus never spoke about his death without speaking of the resurrection. The hope of what was ahead was what sustained him. And it can do that, I believe, for us too. May God bless you this week as you think about his word.